Doctrine of Christ Session 31基督論31講，我哋而家嚟到基督救贖大功嘅第三大主題，亦都係非常重要一個主題，亦都係非常被好多神學家所批評忽略嘅主題。呢個主題就係 propitiation 挽回祭。propitiation。我先加一句説話就係話咧，挽回祭就唔係基督將我哋挽回從罪、從魔鬼嘅權勢挽回過嚟，唔係嘅，完全唔係咁嘅意思。係基督挽回父神，平息佢嘅憤怒，以至於父神用恩慈嚟對待我哋，接納我哋咁嘅意思㗎。我哋睇一小段嘅講義116頁，然後呢，我哋嚟睇慕理喺再思救贖其恩英文版點樣講嘅。新約聖經呢，用挽回祭呢個字，同埋用獻祭、贖罪呢啲嘅詞彙呢，係有密切嘅關係㗎。基督為我哋成就咗挽回祭，為我哋成就贖罪祭，為我哋贖罪呢三個字係有好密切嘅關係㗎。但係有啲聖經學者，例如CH.DODD 呢，就認為呢 propitiation 呢個字啊，挽回祭呢個字咧，應該翻譯成為贖罪祭 expiation。咁我哋會見到呢，有好多聖經嘅翻譯本都唔再翻譯挽回祭呢個字噶啦，就特別喺羅馬書3章25節呢，翻譯成為贖罪噶。呢個係非常之不幸的一件事。佢哋就咁樣翻譯呢個 propitiation 挽回祭係補罪 satisfaction for sin。滿足罪嘅代價 ，cleansing for defilement of sin， 為咗罪嘅污穢帶來潔淨。呢個係阿 Dodd 嘅睇法啊。好，我哋而家睇下我哋嘅老師嘅回應或者批判。呢啲字即係補罪啊、滿足罪嘅代價、洗淨污穢等等咧，都冇帶出挽回祭嗰個意思㗎。而挽回祭嘅意思就係話咧，耶穌基督喺十字架上平息上帝嘅憤怒，平息父上帝嘅憤怒 ，the allaying of the anger of God。喺 RSV 同埋 NEB 等等都係咁樣噶。propitiation 呢個字咧就唔見咗啦。好啦，咁我而家嚟睇慕理嘅再思救贖其恩英文版，25頁開始。Propitiation 挽回祭。The Greek word which stands for our English word propitiation does not appear frequently in the New Testament。喺我哋英文聖經用嗰個 propitiation， 即係我哋中文嘅挽回祭呢個字啊，佢背後嗰個希臘文字呢，希臘嗰個字呢，喺新約聖經唔係時常出現㗎，唔係出現好多次嘅啫。This may seem surprising。呢樣可能令我哋好驚奇。When we consider that it occurs with such frequency in the Greek version of the Old Testament， 點解令我哋驚奇呢？因為我哋要考慮到，當舊約聖經從希伯來文翻譯成希臘文嘅時候，嗰個希臘文嘅譯本即係70士本咧，喺呢個70士本裏邊咧，挽回祭呢個字，呢個希臘文字咧係經常出現㗎。The word so often translated by our English word atonement。不過咧，我哋英文時常將70士本裏邊嗰個字翻譯成為贖罪祭 atonement。We might think that a word which is so common in the Greek Old Testament in connection with the ritual of expiation would have been frequently used by the writers of the New Testament, but this is not the case。咁我哋可能會認為呢，既然啊喺舊約嘅希臘文翻譯本裏邊，呢個字係經常嚟使用去講贖罪嘅儀式，咁新約聖經嘅作者豈不是應該會時常會好自由去用咗呢個字呢？但係事實卻不是如此的。Now, this fact does not mean, however, that the atoning work of Christ is not to be interpreted in terms of propitiation。呢個事實即係新約聖經裏邊唔係成日用呢個字，雖然舊約嘅希臘文翻譯本時常用呢個字，呢個事實嘅意思並不是話呢，基督贖罪嘅工作係唔應該從 挽回者呢個角度去理解㗎。There are passages in which the language of propitiation is expressly applied to the work of Christ。新約聖經裏邊有一啲嘅經文呢，特別係明文嘅用咗挽回祭呢個詞彙去指基督嘅大功㗎。呢啲經文就係 Romans 3:25、Hebrews 2:17、1 John 2:2 and 1 John 4:10。呢啲經文就係羅馬書3章25節、希伯來書第2章17節、約翰一書2章2節同埋約翰一書嘅4章第10節㗎。第一段經文係羅馬書3章25節，上帝設立耶穌作挽回祭，是憑着耶穌的血，藉着人的信，要顯明上帝的義，因為他用忍耐的心寬容人先時所犯的罪。呢係第一段嘅經文。第二段係希伯來書第2章第17節，所以他凡事該與他的弟兄相同，為要在上帝的事上成為慈悲忠信的大祭司，為百姓的罪獻上挽回祭。第三段經文係約翰一書嘅第2章第2節同埋第4章第10節嘅。第2章第2節話，他即係耶穌為我們的罪作了挽回祭，不是單為我們的罪，也是為普天下人的罪。4章第10節，約翰一書4章第10節，不是我們愛上帝，乃是上帝愛我們，差他的兒子為我們的罪作了挽回祭，這就是愛了。And this means, without question, that the work of Christ is to be construed as propitiation。呢度嘅意思就係話，既然我讀咗呢4-5段經文呢，就係毫無疑問嘅，基督嘅大功呢，必須被理解為一個挽回祭嚟㗎。But there is another consideration。除咗有呢啲經文之外呢，仲有另外一個要考慮嘅原因㗎。The frequency with which the concept appears in the Old Testament in connection with the sacrificial ritual. The fact that the New Testament applies to the work of Christ, the very term which denoted this concept in the Greek Old Testament, and the fact that the New Testament regards the Levitical ritual as providing the pattern for the sacrifice of Christ, lead to the conclusion. 好啦，我哋先嚟睇呢個第二個原因裏邊有3個嘅要點㗎。佢話我哋要考慮咩呢？第一，就係舊約聖經裏邊講到獻祭嘅儀式嘅時候，呢個挽回祭嘅概念係咁經常嘅會出現。第二，新約聖經呢，就係講到基督嘅大功嘅時候，就用翻希臘文嘅舊約翻譯本所用嗰個嘅字。第三，新約聖經認為摩西時期獻祭嘅禮儀呢，係作為基督獻上自己嘅大功嘅模式嚟㗎。有呢3方面除咗有經文之外呢，舊約嗰個概念係經常出現，新約係用翻呢個字，然後呢，新約認為舊約嘅儀式係基督嘅獻祭，獻上自己為祭嘅一個預表同埋樣式嚟嘅。因此我哋必須有一個結論 ，lead to the conclusion that this is a category in terms of which the sacrifice of Christ is not only properly but necessarily interpreted。我哋就必須要咁樣一個結論，就係話呢，呢個概念category 就係挽回祭呢個概念，平息上帝嘅憤怒呢個概念呢，我哋不僅係正當嘅要用嚟理解基督嘅獻祭，而且我哋必須咁樣去理解，必須用挽回祭去理解基督嘅死、基督嘅贖罪大功㗎。In other words，換言之，個結論就係話呢， The idea of propitiation is so woven into the fabric of the Old Testament ritual 挽回祭平息憤怒呢個概念呢，係完全係編織在整個舊約聖經獻祭儀式嗰個嘅纖維裏邊。That it would be impossible to regard that ritual as a pattern of the sacrifice of Christ if propitiation did not occupy a similar place in the one great sacrifice once offered。既然平息神嘅憤怒係喺舊約獻祭儀式裏邊完全不可分割，因此呢，我哋就唔可能當我哋去理解到基督一次過獻咗自己為祭嘅時候呢，我哋就唔可能唔考慮到挽回祭平息神嘅憤怒，就係基督工作嘅模式嚟㗎。因為舊約裏邊平息神嘅憤怒係完全係積咗喺嗰個成個纖維裏邊㗎。This is but another way of saying， 換言之 ，that sacrifice and propitiation stand in the closest relations with one another。換言之，獻祭同埋挽回祭呢兩者係有着最密切嘅關係㗎。The express application of the term propitiation to the work of Christ by the New Testament writers is the confirmation of this conclusion。呢個結論即係話獻祭同埋挽回祭係密切相關呢，就係有新約聖經嘅作者用咗呢個挽回祭嘅名詞，就證明咗呢個結論㗎。好啦 ，But what does propitiation mean？ 但係挽回祭 propitiation 係咩意思呢？ In the Hebrew of the Old Testament, it is expressed by a word which means to cover。舊約聖經個希伯來文呢，所用嗰個字呢嘅意思係遮蓋嘅意思㗎 ，KPHR。譬如話今日猶太人嗰個年初八贖罪日呢，叫做 Yom Kippur。Yom Y-O-M 就係日子 ，Kippur K-I-P-P-U-R 背後嗰個嘅字根就係 K-P-R 或者 K-P-H-R。Cover 嘅意思係遮蓋嘅意思。In connection with this covering, there are in particular three things to be noted。我哋對呢個遮蓋呢，要有三方面係要留意嘅。Number one， 第一要留意嘅事就係 ，it is in reference to sin that the covering takes place。呢個遮蓋呢係指罪，即係遮蓋罪咁。Number two， 第二方面要留意嘅 ，the effect of this covering is cleansing and forgiveness。呢個遮蓋所帶來嘅果效就係潔淨同埋罪得赦免咁。Number three， 第三方面留意嘅就係話 ，it is before the Lord that both the covering and its effect take place。呢個罪得遮蓋同埋罪得潔淨都係在耶和華面前遮蓋，喺耶和華面前罪得赦免㗎。參考特別係利未記第4章35節、利未記第10章17節同埋利未記16章30節。This means that 呢度嘅意思就話呢 sin creates a situation in relation to the Lord。罪帶嚟一種嘅處境，就係喺與耶和華關係方面帶嚟一個嘅困境。A situation that makes the covering necessary。呢個處境呢，就必須要有遮蓋。呢個困境就係帶來呢罪必須要被遮蓋咁。It is this God-word reference of both the sin and the covering。所以罪喺神面前犯罪，或者係罪孽喺神面前有罪孽 ，covering 遮蓋喺神面前遮蓋咁。因此呢 ，that must be fully appreciated。我哋必須要體會到呢個呢個係朝上嘅向上帝咁樣一個嘅取向。It may be said that the sin, or perhaps the person who has sinned, is covered before the sight of the Lord。我哋可以咁樣講，話罪 係喺耶和華面前被遮蓋㗎，甚至話嗰個犯罪嘅人乃是在耶和華面前被遮蓋。In the thought of the Old Testament, there is but one construction that we can place upon this provision of the sacrificial ritual. 根據舊約聖經嘅諗法呢，我哋只可以用一種嘅方法去理解呢一個嘅獻祭嘅禮儀所提供嘅遮蓋感，只可以有一種嘅方法理解呢個遮蓋。It is that 呢個唯一嘅理解就係話呢 sin evokes the holy displeasure or wrath of God， 就係話罪就引發出上帝嘅聖潔嘅不喜悅，引發出上帝嘅憤怒。Vengeance is the reaction of the holiness of God to sin。聖潔嘅神對罪嘅回應就係憤怒同埋報應。And the covering is that which provides for the removal of divine displeasure which sin evokes。咁呢個遮蓋呢，就係神所提供嘅方法，讓上帝嘅不喜悅，因為罪所引發出嘅不喜悅，能夠被除掉。It is obvious that we are brought to the threshold of that which is clearly denoted by the Greek rendering in both Old and New Testaments, namely that of propitiation。好明顯呢個 kafir 呢個遮蓋嘅概念呢，就非常之靠近新舊約聖經希臘文嗰個概念，就係挽回祭嘅概念。To propitiate means to placate, pacify, appease, conciliate。挽回嘅意思就係平息憤怒，引致和平、和睦。It is this idea that is applied to the atonement accomplished by Christ。就係呢個平息憤怒嘅概念，係用嚟指耶穌基督所成就嘅贖罪大功㗎。Propitiation presupposes the wrath and displeasure of God。挽回祭嗰個大前提就係上帝嘅憤怒同埋不悅。And the purpose of propitiation is the removal of this displeasure。而挽回祭嘅目的就係要除去呢個嘅不喜悅。Very simply stated， 最簡單嘅講法就係話呢 The doctrine of propitiation means that Christ propitiated the wrath of God。就係話基督平息咗父神嘅憤怒 and rendered God propitious to his people， 而使上帝父上帝呢向佢嘅子民施憐憫。我呢度事先提一句就係話呢嗰個路加福音嘅比喻個稅吏呢隨空係話神啊憐憫我呢個罪人，個憐憫個字呢都係挽回祭個字嚟㗎。Perhaps no tenet respecting the atonement has been more violently criticized than this one。 可能喺救贖論裏邊呢，呢一個嘅教條係最多學者強烈嘅去批評反對㗎。It has been assailed as involving a mythological conception of God。 學者認為呢，你話上帝發怒呢，你講到上帝好似神話裏邊嘅上帝咁樣 mythological conception。As supposing internal conflict in the mind of God， 你亦都好似講到上帝嗰個心意，佢思想裏邊呢係有內在嘅衝突 ，and between the persons of the Godhead， 又好似聖父聖子之間有矛盾。嗱，呢啲係學者嘅好陰險嘅嚇對呢個挽回祭嘅批評。It has been charged that this doctrine represents the Son as winning over the incensed Father to clemency and love。 有啲學者咁樣批評，佢話你講挽回祭嘅意思，咪即係話呢聖子要將聖父嗰個發怒嘅聖父嘅心再贏翻嚟，以致聖父赦罪同埋愛罪人咯。A supposition wholly inconsistent with the fact that the love of God is the very fount from which the atonement springs。 佢哋咁樣嘅暗示，其實呢係完全同聖經係不符合嘅。聖經話俾我哋聽，整個贖罪大功嘅泉源個根源 係上帝嘅愛，唔係聖子搞到聖父嚟到愛我哋，唔係嘅。呢啲係學者們對挽回祭嘅批判。我另外再加多一兩點。自從1970年代末，中國神學研究院嘅期刊第一、第二期呢，我就開始注意到呢，有啲嘅教授啊寫啲文章就話你被接納了，就係話呢，佢哋亦都係好唔中意呢個挽回祭嘅呢種嘅法律上甚至乎講得上嘅憤怒咁樣嘅詞彙，亦都唔中意罪嘅歸算、義嘅歸算係商業上嘅用語，仲有稱義亦都係法律上嘅用語。佢呢啲係17世紀理性主義或者經院主義神學嘅遺產嚟㗎。弟兄姊妹，呢啲係典型嘅巴特新正統派神學喺我哋福音派嘅學者思想裏面造成嘅大禍害嚇。喂，呢個挽回祭、贖罪、稱義、義嘅歸算呢，唔係17世紀理性主義俾我哋㗎。聖經舊約新約都有嘅，你點可以話呢啲係理性主義嘅遺物呢？好，我哋繼續睇。而家我哋睇下毛利點樣批評呢啲咁嘅反對挽回祭、反對神發怒需要平息。毛利點樣批評佢哋嘅反對嘅聲音？英文嘅第27頁。When the doctrine of propitiation is presented in this light， 當學者們咁樣去扭曲嘅，用咁樣扭曲嘅角度去講挽回祭嘅時候，即係話耶穌贏得父神嘅心，令到佢轉回心意去愛罪人。當我哋咁去理解挽回祭嘅時候呢， it can be very effectively criticized。 我哋好容易有效嘅批評打倒咁嘅理論㗎。And can be exposed as a revolting caricature of the Christian gospel。 我哋並且要揭露出咁樣嘅講法呢，係令人反胃嘅對基督教福音嘅扭曲或者醜化。But the doctrine of propitiation does not involve this caricature。 但係挽回祭呢個嘅教義並冇咁樣一種嘅醜化或者係扭曲嘅 ，by which it has been misconceived and misrepresented。 學者們咁樣去醜化挽回祭呢，係佢哋嘅誤解。To say the least, this kind of criticism has failed to understand or appreciate some elementary and important distinctions。 至少我哋要咁樣講，呢啲咁樣嘅學者嘅批評啊，佢哋完全冇理解到、冇體會到一啲最基本嘅、最重要，我哋必須要作出嘅區分。Number one， 第一個區分 ，First of all， to love and to be propitious are not convertible terms。 第一，愛同埋施憐憫呢兩個名詞唔可以完全交替嚟用嘅。It is false to suppose that the doctrine of propitiation regards propitiation as that which causes or constrains the divine love。 假如我哋認為挽回祭呢，呢個挽回呢係父上帝嘅愛嘅原因，即係挽回祭係嗰個因，父神嘅愛係果，或者話呢個挽回祭呢係激發感動神去愛，呢個完全係錯嘅。It is loose thinking of a deplorable sort。 呢種咁樣嘅會完全唔嚴謹嘅思考呢，我哋係要強烈嘅譴責嘅。Deplorable。 To claim that propitiation of the divine wrath does prejudice to or is incompatible with the fullest recognition that the atonement is a provision of divine love。 呢啲咁嘅鬆散嘅毫不嚴謹嘅思考呢，就係將兩個事情呢，將佢分割，即係話呢，上帝嘅憤怒啊，就完全不符合贖罪係上帝嘅愛所提供的，即係呢個贖罪大功裏邊嘅神嘅憤怒同埋神嘅愛 係彼此不一致嘅，而且神嘅憤怒就污染咗神嘅愛。咁樣諗咧係完全不嚴謹嘅，一啲都唔似學者嘅思考。Secondly， 第二個區分係必須要做嘅。Propitiation is not a turning of the wrath of God into love。挽回祭並不是使神嘅憤怒轉移成為愛。The propitiation of the divine wrath effected in the expiatory work of Christ is the provision of God's eternal and unchanging love。基督啊，當佢獻上贖罪祭嘅時候，挽回父神嘅憤怒呢樣嘢呢，就係父神上帝永恆不變嘅愛所預備嘅、所提供嘅呢個嘅挽回佢自己嘅憤怒啊，就係佢自己嘅愛所計劃要做、要成就嘅事嚟嘅。So that 因此呢 ，through the propitiation of his own wrath, that love may realize its purpose in a way that is consonant with and to the glory of the dictates of his holiness。所以呢，藉着佢嘅憤怒被平息啊，佢嗰個永恆所計劃咗個愛就能夠實現出佢嘅目標。而呢個實現愛嘅目標呢，完全符合着佢嘅聖潔嘅要求，同埋佢嘅聖潔嘅榮耀㗎。再嚟一次嚇，神喺永恆裏邊，佢就係聖潔，就係愛，三位一體彼此相愛㗎。就喺咁樣嘅三位一體彼此相愛嘅環境裏邊呢，上帝設立咗呢個救贖嘅工作，係要基督平息父神嘅憤怒，咁樣令到佢嘅聖潔能夠被彰顯，佢嘅聖潔嘅要求能夠被滿足，佢榮耀亦都被彰顯。從來就係佢嘅愛所計劃出嚟嘅，唔係話基督要扭神嘅手瓜啊，要佢去愛，唔係咁嘅。It is one thing to say that the wrathful God is made loving. That would be entirely false. 假如你話充滿着憤怒嘅神而家被基督贏得成為愛，咁係完全錯誤㗎。It is another thing to say that the wrathful God is loving. That is profoundly true. 但係呢，你假如話呢個發憤怒嘅神亦都係一個愛人嘅神呢，咁係真㗎噃，而且係好深奧嘅真理添。你唔可以話神從發憤怒變成愛，唔係。傾倒出憤怒嗰個神就是愛。嗱，呢個係好深奧嘅真理嚟㗎。But it is also true that the wrath by which he is wrathful is propitiated through the cross。但另外一件事亦都係真理嚟嘅，就係話咧，佢發出嗰個憤怒嗰個憤怒咧係透過十字架平息㗎。This propitiation is the fruit of the divine love that provided it。呢個挽回祭呢，就係佢嘅愛所提供嘅，亦都係佢愛所結出嘅果子嚟嘅。約翰一書第4章第10節 ，Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins。不是我們先愛上帝，乃是他先愛我們，差遣他的兒子作為我們的罪的挽回祭，這就是愛了。The propitiation is the ground upon which the divine love operates and the channel through which it flows in achieving its end。上帝嘅愛係根據呢個挽回祭嘅原則去運作嘅。挽回祭亦都係神嘅愛所用嗰個管道，佢透過呢個管道達到佢嘅目的。所以愛同埋憤怒呢，我哋好小心點樣將佢連結嘅。我哋喺呢度開始睇到，無理點樣批判嗰啲反對挽回祭嗰啲不正統嘅學者嘅睇法。我哋講咗2點，我哋下一講呢就要講第3點等等㗎。我哋就喺呢度暫時結束。